Record to the cloud. Okay, we are recording. So we're here together with Erica Armstrong. She's a grade 1 teacher. She used to work in Peel District School Board, but right now you're in the near north, is that it?
That's right.
Yeah. So because she moved school board, she's now back to LTO status and has a grade 1 classroom for the end of the year. But before that, you were an assistive technology resource teacher. And before that I think you did library for a while too.
I did grade 4 for a while, and I did a maker space style space. We called it the Tech Lounge. Okay. Although we also had a library, so it wasn't the library.
Okay, so I thought it was some sort of learning commons, but okay, so something similar to that.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Erica, so much for coming. I've known Erica for, I don't know, 5 years, 7 years, something like that. Mm-hmm. Because I followed her work in EduQuest or French Quest, and I actually did the EduQuest for a while in my own classroom, which was a platform for gaming, not gaming, but badging, for having differentiated learning in the classroom so students could work on whatever they needed to, but also get all the different parts of the curriculum in a flexible way. So I did that for a while, and Erica designed that. And yeah, I'm a very big fan of Erica.
The feeling is mutual.
Oh, thank you. So most of the people watching this video will likely have already watched your classroom tour from the grade 4 classroom, the Empowered class, and or some of your vlogs. And if they haven't, I'll put the link wherever I post this or send this out to the class so that they'll watch it then. So you don't necessarily have to go into the whole, thing of what it looks like. Mm-hmm. Perhaps you could talk about how you manage the students' learning. Like we see the classroom, but how do you manage how the students go from task to task? Are they always in that thing, or do you do classroom group, full classroom times? Okay, and how do you meet the curriculum?
Sure. In that grade 4 classroom, most times in the room were kind of open-ended. But we did have some mandated stuff happening about that time. That was the first year we were mandated to teach 60 minutes of math per day. Okay. And that was being very heavily pushed. So we wanted to make sure some of the time was dedicated specifically to math. So during that time of the day, it was scheduled in, and I would say, okay, you need to do something related to math during this time. Okay. And they still had lots of choices within, but it wasn't completely open in that they couldn't do something completely unrelated to math. Okay. And then we had other times that were completely wide open. It could be anything. And then they had certain times that were scheduled as well. We had to do 40 minutes of French per day. Every once in a while, they'd have their gym or music periods. So you had those certain structures of the school that you couldn't really control. But besides those times, it was left as wide open as I could possibly let it be. Okay. And then as far as making sure I hit the curricular goals, in the summer before the school year started, I looked at every curricular area and I pulled out all we call them big ideas or overall expectations. And I tried to see where they intersected because, I could use science or social studies to meet the language expectations, or sometimes the science and the math things overlapped. And I tried to identify as many of those overlaps as possible, mm-hmm. To make something that seemed like a huge laundry list of things seem a little less daunting. Right. And then I tried to think to myself, okay, well, what materials or what challenges or what kinds of activities could I place in the environment that would naturally kind of nudge students towards those particular goals? So for example, in grade 4, we had to cover rocks and minerals. Well, if I didn't put rocks and minerals in my room, we weren't naturally going to stumble upon that. So I spent my summer, every time I traveled somewhere, I was on Manitoulin Island, I picked up some fossils. I was up in Sudbury or Sault Ste. Marie, I would pick up the rocks natural to that area. So everywhere I went that year, I was just gathering stuff. And it became a center in the classroom. You put out some books connected to that topic, you put out the natural materials, and what kid isn't going to want to take a microscope and look at a shiny rock,
Right.
and then try to figure out what it is and try different things about it. And I would put up little provocations. I would use little plastic stand-up things that you might see in a store or some other location, and I would put questions in it, or a QR code to a video that was interesting, or a how might we statement, different things like that, to try to encourage kids to want to naturally be curious about something. Didn't mean they all would be.
Yeah.
And
sometimes they have to sort of ask those provocative questions for them at the time too.
Yeah.
Right?
And I kind of eventually did let go of trying to force every kid in the room to experience that. Because I had 35 kids in that room at one point. Not all 35 of them really loved rocks and minerals. And I had to be okay with that. And I did let go of that eventually, although that was rough.
And so how would you put that on the report card then, if the student hadn't really interacted with their science or their...
Well, rocks and minerals would be one of the science topics. And if they didn't connect with that one, maybe they connected more with a different science topic.
Okay.
So I let that kind of happen. And they were all exposed to it at some minimal level. But if they didn't all dive deep into it, I let that be okay.
Okay. Yeah, good to know. Okay, and so obviously we see this as a completely different style of learning and different classroom design. Why did you decide to change? Did you start out this way, or did...
No. Straight out of teachers college, I was very driven by the backwards design model that we were taught and reiterated in teachers college. And by that, I mean, you take a specific expectation, one of them, maybe two at a time, and then you design some kind of lesson where as a teacher, you're delivering it. And then you have some kind of way to check, did they learn it? It's a worksheet, it's an assignment, some kind of proof, and usually by paper and pencil, that they've consumed this or learned it somehow. And I taught that way, a couple of years probably out of teachers college. And I tried to make it fun and engaging and give choices. And I always had a little bit of that in me, but it was still very teacher-led and curriculum-driven. But when I started working in Peel and started working in elementary, I was working in areas of growing population, in that I constantly had new students joining my class. So this method of me driving the content and setting the timelines was falling apart at the seams, just by nature of, like, every week I had a new kid show up. And they'd come from somewhere else and hadn't done the prerequisite skills, so they'd be lost, and I'd be trying to catch them up, and they'd be all over the map too with their grade levels and special education needs and whatnot. So here I would be in rooms of 30 kids and having to teach 20 different ways to meet all their needs. And it just wasn't working. And if I taught to the average, which is the best you can do sometimes, I knew there were kids that were bored. I knew there were kids that were frustrated. And then the behavioral challenges emerge because of that. If you're bored or you're frustrated, who can blame you for not wanting to pay attention? Like, sometimes you just can't. So it was born out of frustration, my own personal frustration for them. You can't blame them. So there has to be a better way, right? Like,
you really send so many kids down to the office.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, how did you do this? How did you redesign? What were your goals? And did you have any formal design processes you used?
At the time, I don't think I'd ever heard of design thinking. That wasn't a terminology on my radar. It wasn't until a few years later that I'd heard of it. But once I heard of it, I was like, oh, that's what I was doing all along. But I was very lucky to have a very supportive administrator who saw some strengths in me through use of technology. And it was also lucky timing because we were starting a brand new school. So with a brand new build, we had a brand new budget, and we could choose to use money in different ways. I didn't have to buy that set of class textbooks or the furniture that everyone has. I was given a lot of leeway in being able to design the process from scratch. And so while if you can design all of that from scratch, you can really get creative and get thinking with it. So the timing was kind of serendipitous that way. But it was just a lot of experimentation. And at first it was kind of based on kindergarten. If 4-year-olds can come in and choose centers and know the rules of those centers and make it work, well, can't we all?
Yeah.
You would hope. So I was forced, voluntold to do some planning time coverage in kindergarten in my early years in Peel. So that was definitely a lot of inspiration there. And then it started out, like I said, with just trying to offer centers and choice, kind of like a grown-up kindergarten. And later evolved into French Quest and EduQuest because I was trying to strike that balance between complete freedom and choice and still meeting enough of the curricular goals to feel like I could justify letting them have that much choice, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. And what we, other than the choice and so the kids are meeting their own needs, or you're meeting the needs of all the different levels and interests of the students. Did you have any other goals for your classroom or your design process?
Well, part of it was through that special education lens of inclusivity. Just being able to have more time myself to work one-on-one or in small groups with those students that needed that more guidance or more attention. So for some students, complete freedom and complete choice might be too chaotic or, not structured enough for them. So some people, when they talk to me about this, think, well, is that going to work for everybody? And the answer is no. But because so many of the students are so independent, following their own passions and their own choices, it then leaves me more free to dedicate more time to, small group lessons, one-on-one lessons, developing structures for kids that might need it or might need something different. So that was huge on my mind too, in trying something different like this.
Okay, awesome. We're talking a lot in our design thinking about constraints, especially when you start getting to the ideation stage. So that if you are constrained, you had a little bit more freedom than a typical classroom teacher who has a bunch of desks in the room. And maybe not the funds to get other things. But what were your constraints that fueled your design, do you think?
Yeah, well, that first ideation, which is before the grade 4 classroom that most people saw, was the tech lounge. I had a lot of freedom that maybe wasn't super constraining in that I had a lot of money. I had a lot of freedom. I was a planning time teacher, so I wasn't responsible for the full curriculum. So where I really did then switch to experiencing those constraints was when I took all that idea and now I switched schools and all of a sudden I'm teaching grade 4 and I'm responsible for the entire curriculum. I'm responsible, for everything a homeroom teacher would be. And I had no budget, absolutely zero budget. I showed up to an existing room and opened the door the couple weeks before school and there's 30 desks lined up in a row. So being able to take it and try it again, but this time, face the reality that 99% of people are going to face, made me really have to be creative. That first week was a lot of running around the school and beg, borrow, and steal, as they might say. What's hiding in a storage closet that I can make use of? Well, I found an art drying rack missing 2 wheels that sat crooked all year long in my classroom, but it worked.
Yeah.
Peel had something called the Creative Zone, which was a warehouse that schools put their discarded furniture in. So I showed up there a few times because you never know what you're going to find, and just, what can I pull from here that I can make use of? Well, I found some big, giant, old, ugly conference tables, probably from the 70s. These things were beastly and really ugly. But I took whiteboards paint and painted them, and they looked like they matched after that and became great collaborative workspaces instead of little tiny desks. So kind of the mantra of where there's a will, there's a way. I just try to keep flexible, and maybe I didn't get to design it exactly the way I wanted, but I could just be inspired by what was available and how can I fit this in and make this work on zero budget.
Okay. And I think that you're answering the next question, which is how's the design being iterative for your classroom? So it did start it off with just centers essentially, but then that happened in my classroom as well, where I went to more passion-based and inquiry-based learning. But as I did that, then I realized I can't really use unit tests, and this is high school level. Use unit tests because everyone's learning different things, and what are you going to test them on unless you're testing them on the inquiry process, which I did try to have tests on that, but again, it didn't match, right? So eventually that over time brought me to the gradeless classroom and more the portfolio based and artifacts and stuff like that. So a similar process I assume happened with you.
Yeah, I couldn't even keep everyone on the same timeline, nor did I want to. Because that was a big problem for me traditionally was, okay, I'm going to do this unit. We're going to start on this date. And we're going to have our test or assignment due this date. Well, certain kids would be done in 2 days and other kids would never get finished. And you'd be chasing them and keeping them in from recess or all that other stuff that I didn't really believe was good for them, but I was doing to try to force them to fit the timelines, and it just didn't work. So switching to more like a digital portfolio type of thing and being okay with not everyone's going to have the same quantity of work was a big part of it for the assessment side for sure.
Yeah. And do they need to show it to you 3 times to make it valid, or one time enough, or those questions are always there, right? So obviously your first administrator was very supportive. In general, how's your administration and the parents taken to this or reacted to this?
Yeah. The first one was super supportive. Then while at the same school, my administrators changed. The second one was more skeptical. And I'm not sure if she ever fully ended up on board with that because I ended up switching schools a year later.
Okay.
Anyways, so she never really had much of a chance to come around to it. My second school, that administrator, I was very upfront in my interviews what my vision and what I wanted to do. So at least she had a heads up and, could have not hired me if she didn't want to go for it at all.
Yeah.
But certainly, I remember one day in the first week of school, she was just kind of looking around and she said to me, Erica, why do you have a sewing machine in your classroom?
Yeah.
And like, she was being very sincere. She had no idea how that could possibly connect to any part of my curriculum.
Yeah.
So it got me thinking of how I needed to articulate better for her benefit, for my parents' benefits, for even the students' benefits. Like, okay, here's a sewing machine and we're doing stuff, but what are we actually learning here? And so that was an eye-opening experience for me. And I remember our parent-teacher interviews that year, grade 4 parent-teacher interviews, all the parents come in and their biggest worry and question was, why is there no homework? And, how am I going to know what the students are learning and what exactly is going on? They were a bit confused by, what was happening in the classroom. Okay, I need to communicate more. Again, put it on myself. It was my learning and my growth as a teacher. So we started using a tool called Seesaw a little bit more often so that they could see little videos. And that's when I started the blog channel as well. Trying to give people more information because I found that any resistance to it was usually because
of ignorance, really. They didn't understand.
Yeah, a lack of understanding. And 3 weeks into September, we went through something called reorganization, where you look at the size of your classroom and the size of all the classes in the school, and you kind of shuffle kids a bit. And I had a student coming into my room whose dad was the president of our parent committee at the school.
Mm.
And he was very resistant of his kid being switched into my class. Not because he had anything against me, he just didn't want to have any change, essentially. So the principal heard a lot of communication from that parent early on. But it was funny because by Christmas, he was my biggest cheerleader.
Yeah.
He was going to every parent committee meeting saying, why isn't every classroom like Erica's classroom? By the end of the year, it was calls to the principal saying, Erica better be my son's teacher again next year. So again, to know it is to love it, right? If you're only known one way of school,
Yeah.
and that's what you've grown up with, and you were successful at it, then you might expect school to still look at least somewhat similar, and change is scary for anybody. So I learned to over communicate.
Yeah. I actually had a similar kind of experience with my students. I learned in the second year of doing it that it wasn't so much put on me, but I had to get the students to communicate. So, and they're high school.
Mm-hmm.
I would make the students email home, email one of their parents or both, and then CC me. And then they would explain essentially what was happening in the classroom, what they were learning, what they were working on, what the goals were, etc. So then when it did come down to parent-teacher interviews, which we don't see every parent in high school, there wasn't a lot of angst about
Mm-hmm.
what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
It was more like, how do you manage this? And how is my son or daughter doing? That's essentially the questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, and even at my kids' ages, I did try to put as much of the documentation on them, because there's one of me and 35 of them in that year.
That's crazy.
It fluctuated. It was 35, then it went down to 22, and then it was back up to 33 by the end of the year. Like I said, growing population, constant change. But I taught them how to use Seesaw and how to take a video and take a picture and explain it and not ramble on, but be precise. And they had to classify it as to what they were learning. Okay, this was a piece of evidence about science and language, or this was a piece of evidence about math. Because if I had to do all the documentation myself, there's just no way.
That's not possible. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, where am I on my list here? Do you use design thinking in your classroom with your students, and how is it used?
I never did formally. I never called it that, at least. But I did have this kind of wheel thing that used to be up on the wall in my more makerspace type environment that very much models any design thinking framework I've seen. Asking a question, doing your research, coming up with a way to share whatever it was you've learned about, creating that thing, whatever it happened to be, sharing that with an audience, getting feedback, reflecting on it, and so on and so forth.
Right.
But even the writing process, that's very traditional. That's a form of a design thinking process in a way too. And the scientific model from back in the day is also very similar. So yes and no.
So you used it, but it wasn't formally done as now we're doing design thinking.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But I mean, I've seen your classroom, and your kids are constantly designing. They're designing movies. They're designing, I don't know, things out of cardboard, and they're making things with the sewing machine. They're always designing, really.
Yeah.
But it's just sort of a ubiquitous attitude or mindset in your classroom.
Exactly. Yep.
That's actually one of the ways we talk about designing in this course. Is it doesn't have to be that process per se. It could be just a set of mindsets of being okay with ambiguity, and we've got radical collaboration, so everybody's equal and everybody's participating. You know, there's different mindsets that you would have as you go about your work. So,
and at different times I've toyed with making it more formal or teaching it more explicitly. And then I always got kind of stuck with choosing a particular model. They're all slightly different, and they all fit slightly different situations. And then so many of my kids would never make it fully around the process. And I always question with myself, like, do I have to force them to finish if they start an idea and figure out that it's not a great idea and want to abandon it? So I never quite decided myself how best to handle that. So
Okay.
that's part of the reason why I never made it more formal, is because I could never wrap my head around it myself.
Yeah. Okay. Good to know. And how did you fund everything? I mean, the first iteration you did have funding, but this grade 4 classroom, you talked about going to the creative zone and beg, borrowing, and steal. Did you also get any other funding?
Yeah, I got some like regular funding you would usually get, and it was just a matter of spending it differently. So as an example, you get a consumable budget. And this particular principal decided to assign it to your whole grade level. Well, I went to that first meeting with everybody in my grade level, and they all wanted to buy notebooks and do-a-tangs and binders and pencils and the normal school stuff. And I advocated for, well, can we take the money and split it up so each class gets an equal amount, and we can decide ourselves how to spend it, because I don't want any of those things, but I do want to buy clay and paint and like different consumable things that probably none of you want, but I do. So they agreed. And then I had to spend my money just a little bit differently.
Okay.
And then too, when it came time, every once in a while, our principal would assign us a certain amount of money for grade level resources. And in the past, traditionally, that went towards more textbook style materials, or books or that type of stuff. And so I was able to advocate for, well, let's get some Lego kits, and let's get a green screen, or let's buy some microphones, or let's think a little bit differently about how we can spend this resource money to help us meet the curriculum, but not be so focused on the more literacy driven materials. Not to say we had none of those, but let's maybe not buy a class set. Let's buy a few.
And I assume like your library that you have is more like it's accumulated over the years. It's not something you started off your first year teaching,
right?
With a library that size.
Yeah.
And of course, you probably draw on the school library for books.
Absolutely. And like even this year, being in grade 1 now, I'm going to my public library every 2 weeks and taking out 50 books at a time. Mm-hmm. To have that kind of stuff, like use the resources that you have. And
for sure. Yeah. That's awesome. So the only thing I would just kind of want to touch on now before we let everyone else ask questions is the student engagement. I've been in your classroom while it's on, and people have seen your videos. The students are all engaged.
Yeah.
Well, probably not all,
no,
all times, but they are very, intellectually and the entertainment kind of engagement. Do you find that that's a natural outcome of the way it's being presented to them, or has there been? Do you do anything special to make it engaging, other than what you've already told us?
I find it's natural. I do keep engagement in mind. Like it's one of my top priorities, because if you don't care, I can't make you care. Like I can make you sit through it and you can physically be there.
Yeah.
But, I try to get in the mindset of the age group of whatever I'm at, and, what are they interested in? And if I'm not sure, I just talk with them and figure out where their interests are going. Or I might start out with a very small quantity of materials and see what they're naturally gravitating to, and then, okay, get more of those.
Yeah, right.
Rather than thinking I know what they're going to like and pre-planning it all. It's throughout the year, it's very iterative in that way.
And every year, imagine it'd be different students, and would they have a different kind of,
Yeah, some things are universally popular. Lego has never not been popular. I'm always looking out at garage sales or Value Village or wherever there's Lego. All ages, boys, girls, doesn't matter. Certain things are universally loved. Mm-hmm. Other times, certain kids have very specific interests and just love it. Whenever I find there's a kid that's not engaged for whatever reason, that's a time for a conversation. Like Megan was talking about, it could be there's something going on outside of the school context that really needs nurtured. And until that need is met, none of the fun stuff I throw at them matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's true, and I've seen that with my students. And if you're hungry, you're tired, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you're not going to get to engagement if those things aren't met.
Mm.
And then beyond that, it's just a matter of talking to kids about what they're interested in. What are you passionate about? What do you do outside of school time? What's a project you've done in the past that you really loved? And then I do make specific suggestions to kids. Oh, have you ever thought about making a YouTube video about that passion? Have you ever considered reading this book? I think you'll really like it. Things like that. It's more like a coaching mentality than oh, I know what you're going to like, and here it is.
Yeah. 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 And what was I going to say? It just like everything you're talking about right now is part of the design process that we talk about for empathy and empathy research. Mm-hmm. Whereas you're doing it on the spot, mm-hmm. as opposed to ahead of time, because you can't know your kids until you know your kids.
Exactly.
Right. Mm-hmm. So that's, I know, as a classroom teacher, we're all like that. You can't, what worked last year might completely fail the next year because you have a different set of kids, different needs, different, or that Pokemon Go thing was big last year. It's no longer big now. And it's like, oh yeah, old news, miss.
Yeah.
I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, that's definitely something that the empathy part has to happen ongoing and when you're actually in the classroom, as opposed to, it's very hard because the students in my classroom are designing for a classroom they're not in, right? Or for a system needs,
yeah,
things like that. So
I think it's both, though. I think you do have to have a plan going in, but then you have to be responsive once you're there. Yeah, I think there's room for both.
Okay. This is awesome. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you think I should have asked? Yeah, I don't even know about your classroom that I should ask.
Yeah, I don't know. We touched on a lot of it, that's for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll open it up now to everyone else watching and listening. Does anyone have any questions? I'd love to hear them, and so would Erica, I'm sure.
Hi, this is Christine. So I was wondering, do you work alone on this, or do you have your partner teachers, or is there anyone else in the school that does this with you?
That's a good question. I've done it solo when I was in more like the planning teacher role. But at the same time, because I had every class rotating to me, those teachers would then see what their kids were doing with me, and it would kind of inspire things back in their classrooms, which was kind of a neat way to approach it. So things started to spread. Then when I did the grade 4 classroom, I did have a teaching partner. She was right next door to me. And we knew each other very well and trusted each other very much. And she did integrate a lot of the same style of teaching in her room, but our two rooms were by no means identical in style or the choice of activities or anything. Because she had her own passions as well, and her students had their own passions. So it took on a different spin. I don't think she was quite as comfortable with letting go. Wasn't quite as far along in trying this as I was. I'd already been doing it for many years by that point, and it was her first year giving it a try. So she had a different, comfort level with it. And then this year again in grade 1, I'm brand new. So I have no social capital in this building. Nobody knows anything about me. I'm just the LTO teacher. So very quietly just doing my own thing. And, as people come into my room for duty or for other reasons, questions are starting to happen and people are starting to collaborate with me more, and it's starting to happen a little bit. So it can be tricky when you're the oddball wanting to do something super different in a system where maybe traditionally grade teams do kind of all do the same thing together.
Yeah, it is hard. As an instructional coach last year, there's a lot of grade teams that everyone had to do lockstep. Everyone was on the same project at the same time, as all cookie cutter recipe stuff. I'm not saying they weren't good work, but it was someone who wanted to do something different it was very difficult for them, for sure. Yeah. Any other questions with Christine or Megan or Kim?
Well, I do just teach French as well. So you talked about French Quest.
Mm-hmm.
So is that a program that is helping them like code? It's more technology. I know I do centers as well like that, where they'll go code the bebop to the word or things like that. It's more game style as well. Is that
Right.
what that is, the French Quest?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point to bring up because that kind of took on a life of its own. So French Quest evolved out of me doing centers with my core French classes. And then I essentially put it on a website where students would pick a badge that they wanted to work towards. So maybe they wanted to earn their coding badge. So the website would list, okay, to earn this badge, you need to go to code.org and do this set of lessons and take a screenshot when you're done and hand that in. Or do you want to earn your author badge? So you have to draft a book and go through the writing process and publish it. Or you want to learn I can ask to go to the washroom badge. And you have to be able to come up to me and, ask in French, est-ce que je peux aller aux toilettes? So there were hundreds of different little bite-sized or bigger projects that students wanted to, earn badges. And so as they handed in evidence, they also earned points. So something that took, 10 minutes to do might be worth 10 points, where a longer term project might be worth 150, 200 points. And then they would level up. So it's gamification. The points and levels didn't really matter. It didn't equate to a certain grade. I didn't give them certain privileges because they earned more points, but they got like competitive with themselves and with each other a little bit. I don't know. Everybody feels good when you earn points, even if they're not worth anything.
For sure.
But with French Quest, so I don't know how this happened, but Sylvia Duckworth, and if you're in the French teaching community, that might be a familiar name. She is quite popular on Twitter and whatnot, but she came to visit my classroom because I guess she had saw on Twitter, maybe. Anyway, she ended up coming to tour my classroom and she fell in love with French Quest. And at that time, it was just for me. I was just doing it for myself. But she begged me. She said, Erica, please share this. I want to do this in my classroom next year. So I developed a website and let other teachers sign up for it. And at one point at the peak of it, I think I had about 50 classrooms around the world, all taking on this French Quest program. So collaborating on a major scale with other classrooms replicating it. And the coolest part was Kenora Catholic District School Board. They invited me up to their school board, flew me up there, and I got to tour a classroom that was using French Quest. And it was like I just walked into my own classroom.
Wow, that's awesome.
It literally ran itself just the same way as if I had set it all up. And it was so cool to see a teacher I mentored doing something similar with her own spin on it. But it was mind-blowing. So that just goes to show you can create a framework and have it be replicated by others and have it work. It did. I do still have French Quest. I've now transitioned it away from, I was running a website. It was very expensive for me to maintain. And because I couldn't dedicate full-time attention to it, it was draining so much of my spare time. So for my own sanity, I stepped away from running it. And I now offer it through Google Classroom. People can replicate it on their own Google Classroom and do something similar, but at least now I don't have to maintain a server and maintain the code base and keep updated with it. And anyways, long story short, it wasn't sustainable in that aspect, but it was super cool for me to see, I think it was about 3,000 students all following something I had designed and set up.
Yeah. And then you offered a similar version that I used in my Jardim classroom. I think you called it, what'd you call it?
I called it EduQuest.
Yes.
Because people started seeing French Quest and saying, well, I could do that for geography or math or whatever. But the name French Quest, of course, drove them away from it. Yeah. So I just cloned it and named it something different and said, here it is. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. I would like to get back into my classroom to see what those things are. It's been a few years now, but it's all down now. Your server's down and everything. Yeah,
I left it up for a few years, even after I stopped letting people sign up for it, just for that reason, so people could
get their stuff.
Yeah, but I think as of a few months ago, I don't think it's there anymore.
Yeah, it's not a problem. Okay, anyone else with questions? Or Christine, did you have a follow-up question for French Quest?
No, I'm good. I'm really interested in looking into it and purchasing it and applying it to my classroom, actually. Thank you so much.
No worries, and be in touch if you have any other questions. I'm always supporting people that are using it, and it's fun to do.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay,
Susan, I actually have a question for you.
Oh.
Because, well, I'm high school track, right? So, and you know, I can totally see myself doing this in, you know, a grade 6 classroom, or maybe a grade 7 classroom, maybe getting into grade 8 a little bit. But, you know, high school in Alberta, if you want to get into university, it's all about the numbers. It's all about, you know, having the marks and doing the diploma exams. And, you know, the more structured the classroom is to, you know, get you through all those, you know, it's like you're asking the kids, you know, it just jump through that flaming hoop like a good little tiger. And, you know, we have to provide the practice, you know, without the flames for a while. And I'm just wondering, you had talked about demonstrating learning through portfolios rather than marks at the high school level. And I'm just wondering how you coordinated that with university entrance, because, you know, Calgary is a very diverse community. There are a lot of new immigrants who come from countries where, you know, math is math and language arts is language arts and science is science. And they, you know, they see their children's doom unfolding before their eyes if you get too far from the structured approach. So I'm just wondering, how do you address those concerns? How do you operate this way at the older levels where kids are, you know, their engagement levels are plummeting by this time, a lot of them. And parents are just, they're so nervous for their children's futures. How do you do it?
Okay, well, a few caveats. First of all, mostly I did it in my grade 9, which is high school in Ontario. My grade 9 classes, both my science and my geography. And we don't have what you call diploma exams or provincial exams. We don't have those. So we do have curriculum. It's fairly strict curriculum that you need to follow. But it's not that they actually have to take an exam that everyone else in the province has to take. So a little bit more flexibility for that, I suppose. Okay, bye, Kim. Kim says goodbye, and thank you very much. It was very interesting and inspiring. Thanks, Kim. Have a good day. So in that sense, there's a little bit more flexibility. But there's still just the same pressures. We have very highly diverse population, very high immigrant level in Ontario, especially the Southern Ontario schools that we worked in. So the very similar pressures. In my grade 9 classroom, I did use the whole, I didn't give grades. I gave only descriptive feedback for all the work that they did, and it was inquiry based, sort of like the play based, but at the higher levels we don't really call it play, although it is kind of play sometimes. But they had to go through the whole inquiry process of creating a question and doing research and the whole kind of thing that Erica was talking about. And the way I managed that was with overall learning goals. So I created a course plan that incorporated the whole curriculum, and they had 5 overarching learning goals. So the overarching learning goals, everything that we did in the class led towards those overarching learning goals. And then the overarching learning goals became the sections of their portfolio, and they had to provide evidence of how they met those overarching learning goals. So they didn't necessarily touch on every single expectation. We call them expectations, not outcomes, in the curriculum. And so there was no grades of their work along, but then we did have a grade conference or a portfolio conference before midterm and then before the final mark, where the student looked, because the overarching learning goals corresponded with basically a rubric for the whole course. And so we looked at the rubric and saw whether they had the evidence for whatever level, and we came to an agreement on their grade that they would get. There wasn't really a lot of worry in my classroom about students not doing the work, because it was up to them to show their mastery of these overarching learning goals. I don't know if that helps. So then I did a similar thing in my grade 12 World Issues class, which is a university prep course. I had an overarching learning goals for the whole course, very similar to my grade 9s actually, because the geography curriculum has the same strands and it continues. But every time we had a new assignment, which was still very inquiry based. For example, in my World Issues class, we entered a contest, a STEM contest with Microsoft about designing a solution to a world problem. And I incorporated a lot of the curriculum from the World Issues classes on international organizations and you know, the issues that are happening in the world. They could choose different ones, but they still had expectations that they were showing when they did this STEM thing. But when they handed in their assignment, they still used the overarching learning goals rubric for it. It just like each part mapped to a different part of that rubric. I hope that's making sense. So they still got grades, like it was more graded. I preferred to go with the grade list, but I actually conferenced with the whole class at the beginning of the year to decide whether we were going to do that or not. And they really wanted me to just lecture and do very traditional learning, but I refused to do that. And in actual fact, as the course went on, I did it less and less and less. Yeah, because I started off trying to be more traditional, and I was so bored. I couldn't take it anymore. So I just pushed them into the different inquiries, and they loved it at the end. They just hadn't learned that way before, because it's new, you know, it's more new for our school system. So in the end, it was the same kind of thing where they didn't have a portfolio per se, but they still were using, I only had one rubric for every assignment, and it all led back to these overarching learning goals, which were based on the curriculum. Does that help, Megan?
That helps a lot, because you know I was thinking that well, the school.
Sorry for interrupting. I'll share since everybody will be watching this anyway. I'll share my overarching learning goal rubrics with you, so you can see what it would look like in that particular course. It would look, actually, we have a large. I did a project funded by the ministry on grade lists, on feedback focused assessment. And I worked with a science teacher and a math teacher, and and an English teacher, sorry. And we did all sorts of different kinds of, these kinds of rubrics or class portfolio based grading. So I could get some examples or show you I have a website that a blog site that we use and stuff like that.
Well, I love that, because, you know, it's so hard. I've just noticed, you know, during my practicums and observations, and I'm a TA in a junior high school. Well, it's K through 12 school, but I mostly work with the older kids. And, you know, I find that they learn so differently. Like, you know, participation or discussion marks that are based on classroom participation, you know, to me, that disadvantages introverts. Because, you know, some people know what they want to say and they talk fast, but others, you know, they need time to process their thoughts before they're willing to share. Some of them have insecurities and they're afraid of being laughed at. So, you know, it just seems that it's only logical to offer them a range of options, like, you know, online discussions on, like, you know, Edmodo or Schoology or whatever. Yeah, just so that, you know, like I suggested to
there now to do these kinds of things. I used Erica's using Seesaw. You can use Google Classroom, similarly, if your school system allows parents to see into certain aspects of it.
Yeah.
What was the other one that I used? Wasn't last year, the year before. The one you have to pay a fair amount for. Do you know the name, Erica? The one that's more high school based. I can't
Fresh
remember.
Grade?
Fresh Grade? No, the other one.
Sesame?
Sesame.
Oh, okay.
So there's Seesaw, Sesame, Fresh Grade, Google Classroom. There's lots of ways to, or just like, honestly, my students, because we're using Google Classroom, their portfolios were done in like a Google site, which is easy to make there. And they integrate all their Google documents and images and videos and everything in there. It's super easy to, you don't even barely have to teach them anything about it, or they'll teach each other essentially.
And that way the parents can see what they're doing. They can see the impressive work that they're doing. And yeah, it's just so hard to reconcile something like that with the marks based.
In my classroom, because like for example, geography is Canadian geography, and every single issue has similar aspects, the stakeholders and things like that. So so whether they did fishing or mining or forestry or urban, renewal or anything like that, they could still hit the same curricular outcomes, but they use different topics, whatever they were interested in.
Oh, that's really great.
That might not be as easy if you have a diploma exam, as you called them, where they have to have knowledge about a specific content.
Oh, it's very specific. Well, the social studies, the English, the science, the math, every kid in the province does the same diploma exam. And that's really the only data that is used in Alberta universities. It's all about the numbers. You are literally a student is a number. I'd love to change that, but nobody listens to me at this point.
We're with you. We're the same. The universities look for the grades as well, but because we don't have those provincial exams, I think it is a little bit more flexible, a little bit. But we still have provincial curriculum that we cover. And do you get the same kind of pressure from your parents, Erica, about content level, or is that gone by the wayside now?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of parents are still driven by grades, and at the elementary level, we do have provincial exams, EQAO,
right,
which don't count towards students' promotion or grades, but it's still high stress, and parents are still very driven by it. So
yeah,
I hear you. That's definitely something people are concerned about, for sure.
It's tough. In Alberta, the schools are actually ranked by performance on their provincial assessments in grades. Well, they got rid of the grades 3 for a while, but they're bringing it back to basics. And grade 6 and grade 9, and then you've got the diploma. Oh, I know, Jason Kenny. I don't get me started. But
the same thing. I just didn't really mention EQAO because it doesn't account for our grades. Like, it doesn't actually go into your grade at all. It just does what you said, is rank schools and rank, teachers sometimes, and determine whether the focus will be on math next year or whatever. Because there are grades 3, 6, is it 3, 6 are EQAO, and then grade 9 is math, and grade 10 is literacy. So the only one actually kind of counts is the grade 10 literacy test, because they can't graduate without that.
Right. And, there's a legitimate use for the data for sure. But, ranking schools so that, the schools in urban areas with high new immigrant populations are disadvantaged in the rankings because of the, the language issue, whereas the, Tony private schools and, sort of, they top the charts every year. It's just, it's sad. Because the teachers are working so hard in these schools with populations that have, high needs, and yet their schools are at the bottom of the rankings every year. But there is a legitimate use for the data for sure. But
take it off with a grain of salt for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
You see my dog. My daughter just got home. The dog's gone to visit her.
Oh,
That's so funny. Just see the tail and that's it. It's funny. Okay, so Megan's talk, Christine's talk. Do you have any other questions before we say goodbye to Erica and say thank you so much? No?
I've learned a lot. Thank you very much to both of you. Erica, it was wonderful I'm going to check out your site for sure.
Yeah, likewise. It's always great to talk with kindred spirits, people looking at similar issues.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Christine. I'm glad you were able to join us.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Erica. And when this is done, I will post it probably on my YouTube and then send out the link. And so you can use it
Awesome.
if you want to share. And I really appreciate it. Love to see more of what you're doing in your grade 1 classroom now.
Yeah, I've got to start blogging again. So thanks for the nudge.
It wasn't the intention, but yeah, okay. It's more for me. I'm just looking for me, you know. Anyway, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.